Glad we avoided that. I don't know if you know it or not, but the Bible does talk about sports. Not a lot of sports. I only know 2 sports that are specifically mentioned in the Bible, and there might be another. If you can think of it, let me know. But boxing is mentioned in the Bible, and running is mentioned in the Bible. Wrestling, yeah, sure. Pretty intense wrestling is mentioned in the Bible. Not the it's not WWF anymore, but a different kind of wrestling. Running is the one that I think is definitely nearest and dearest to God's heart. It's for sure the sport of His choosing. I say that because I run, and I'm biased. But it's a love-hate relationship. Are any of you runners? I know some of you might run a little bit, toy with it. Some of us don't like to talk about it too much because people make a big deal out of it. If you run far enough, people start making a big deal out of it, and it's really not a big deal. But I'm going to use a little bit of storytelling from my own life today because I want to do that to connect with the message for the next 2 weeks, anticipating our launch of what we've decided will be called life groups. I know there's small groups, care groups, life groups, all kinds of groups. They're all the same thing with different names. And in the end, maybe the name doesn't matter a whole lot. But I like the word life, and I like the idea in the acronym, as Mark Cristaldi was telling me about it the other week, that we would go with life groups and try to consistently call them that. And in the survey that we sent out, there are people who said, I don't even know what a life group is. How am I supposed to give feedback? Or care group at that time, I think we were calling it in the survey. And so I want to, over the next 2 weeks, talk about the biblical precedent for why it is that fellowship with one another matters so much that we would do arm twisting to get you involved in a life group or in something else. Why won't they leave me alone? I'm pretty good with the level of engagement I have right now. Well, that's the answer we're trying to give you in the next 2 weeks of sermons. We're taking a break from the Sermon on the Mount, and we'll come back to it. This will be a kinder, gentler 2 weeks. The story I'm sharing with you today is not kind or gentle. It was a very difficult run in my life. Why do I run? I run because when I was a young person, I didn't fit in any of the other sports. I wasn't an athlete. Do any of you identify with that? But running, that I could handle. You just put one foot in front of the other and keep going. And if you can go faster, great. That's even better. But you don't have to handle the ball flying at you, right? You don't have to swing something to hit a ball, the worst of which is a golf club. If any of you play golf, you are awesome. Because I cannot do that, nor do I have the patience or the time to put into it, nor the money, apparently, because of how expensive it is to play the sport. But you don't have to handle bodies slamming into you not very often when you're running. And so it's a kinder, simpler sport. But many of you would say you hate it. How many of you hate running? Yeah. It's painful. It could be boring. You might feel bored when you run. You probably, if you're like me, and you're getting older, you feel like your body doesn't quite want to do it, right? It's mind over matter all the time, and it's hard to do that mind over matter thing. It's really difficult. Why would anyone do it? Just for practical reasons. Well, every time I watch television, they say I'm supposed to do something, 3 days a week or something in order to have a healthy heart and whatnot. So people do it to maybe get a health benefit. Some people do it because it clears their mind. They need some time alone. That's probably a big part why I do it. And you'd say, there are other ways you can be alone. You don't have to do that. Why don't you just sit on the back porch? It's a lot easier. But there's something about it. I hate it. I hate giving up sleep. I hate the way it feels for, probably 75% of the exercise of running. And yet I keep doing it, maybe more and more. There's something about it that has taught me a lot about life. And so what I wanted to do today was to share with you something that I've learned about life just from one of my hobbies. And you probably can share a similar story. One of the things I'd like to do in the days to come, in the weeks and months to come, is begin having a way that we not make the service longer, but maybe shorten a little bit of what I'm saying sometimes to have testimonies so that people can share what they've learned and what God has taught them and what God is doing in their lives. Because we're supposed to have that kind of relationship with one another where we share what God is doing and encourage one another and spur one another on, as Harry read, to good deeds. And so that's what we're talking about today. I didn't run an official race in my life until I ran a marathon. There was this one little event at my middle school out in Pittsburgh, Carson Middle School, where I got to run in a race, but it was just at the school, and it wasn't like an interscholastic event. It wasn't really competition in the truest sense. And so I just couldn't get excited about something that I could go out and just do. And it seemed like all the distances of races around me, I was always kind of had a good cardiovascular health, and I could just go do it. So I needed something that seemed like a challenge worth doing. So I said to Josh Dove, and you know Josh Dove? Piece of trivia, Josh Dove ran my first marathon with me. He never ran one after that. We trained together, sort of. I would train all week. I'm type A, so I'd put a schedule together, and if I didn't check it off on the schedule, and I failed to complete my workout, I felt really bad. And it was like severe mental anguish. So I checked off all my workouts because I didn't want to miss one. For no good reason, just because I made the schedule, and if I don't check it off, I'll feel bad. Any other type A personalities out there? Right? So you know what that feels like. It's irrational, but it's how we are. And so I had a schedule. Josh didn't really have a schedule, but he knew on Saturdays we would do the long run together on Saturday mornings. So guess which workout he always did? Saturday mornings. Never did the other workouts during the week, though. So the Saturday morning runs got more and more difficult for the two of us to stay together because he wasn't training during the week, and I was. And so he wasn't saying, hey, I'm not training, but it became obvious when we'd get to the Saturday run that somebody wasn't training. Don't tell him I told this story, if you know him. And we went up to Scranton and we ran the Steamtown Marathon. It was my very first marathon. And as we were running, it was like mile 6. How many of you know Mark Niles? If you've been to camp as a child, you know Mark Niles. If you're like, I don't know how old you have to be to have had Mark Niles for the last 30 years or whatever that week of camp. But or maybe you've worked with him or gone on a mission trip. He went to Haiti, I think, with Kim and some others recently. So he actually showed up. It was of all sacrilegious things, it was a Sunday morning. They tend to schedule those marathons for Sunday mornings. And so we're running about mile 6, Josh and I, and we see this crazy guy with a ball cap on that says Coventry Christian School on it. He wears it everywhere. And he's in like loafers and, kind of your church attire. And he's running the wrong way on the course saying, yeah, all right, yeah, go Mr. Fisher. You know, if you know Mr. Niles, he's kind of like that. And it was a little embarrassing. But I was really moved. I really was. I mean, he drove up to Scranton on a Sunday morning for he had nothing to do with my training. He wasn't, and I didn't expect him, but he just showed up, and gave me a big boost. I didn't need it. It had been downhill for 6 miles. I was feeling good and wasn't thinking about what it would be like at mile 20. And I loved that. Before that first marathon, we planned out with the family like where I would get to see them. Because one of the highlights, maybe the highlight, is if you're running a long race, seeing your family at some point. And so that's like the next thing you look forward to, is when will I see them again? And occasionally some character on the side who cheers for you, inspires you. But at the end of it, I said to my wife, Sherry, I said, I'm never going to do that again. I remember I cried when I saw the final home stretch. I cried, I sobbed, I wept like a baby. And then I laughed kind of hysterically, and then I wept through my laughter because it was so long. I didn't know how long it was. And I had run up to 20 miles, but the marathon's 26.2. And it just, everybody was like, the last 10K, no big deal. You break through the wall, and then it's just a 10K. And it was awful. It was terrible. Every step was painful. And When I crossed, though, it was such a wonderful feeling. But it wasn't good enough for me to say, I'll try that again. I said, never again. And I don't know how many, 40 or something, marathons. I think I've run 40. And so, obviously, there was something of the rewards of that stuck, right? And eventually, I got a goal. And I ran that one in like 3 hours and 45 minutes. And I learned about the Boston Marathon, and I heard that you had to qualify for Boston. So after I'd run a lot of marathons, I thought, well, what's left? Because I need something to challenge me, because the distance was still difficult, but not like the first time. And so I learned you had to qualify for Boston. But to do that, I had to shave 35 minutes off of my time. And I thought, well, if I wait till I turn 35, they give you a little bit, like every 5 years, right? So I'm like, if I can hold where I am now and keep steadily improving, maybe when they give me to 3 hours and 15 minutes to qualify, I'll be able to do it. But I can't do 3:10. I kept trying, I couldn't get close. So for a decade, I kept trying to qualify for Boston. In 2009, at the Steamtown Marathon, I qualified for Boston. And after failing and failing and failing and failing and failing, some 30 marathons or something, I failed. But what kept me going was that I hung out with people who ran. And I hung out with people who motivated me by saying, you'll never do that. You're just not good enough. And I hung out with people who motivated me by saying, you can do this. You just stick with it, man. You were so close last time, and they kept encouraging me. They'd go on runs with me. When they got too old or they had back problems, they'd ride their bike beside me, right? They'd ask me how it was going. Did you do your speed workout at the track? That kind of thing. No, I did it. Well, I did it, but I kind of ran slow because I didn't feel like, like pushing myself. And so there was this fellowship, and I had stated my goal to a lot of people. And so they're going to keep asking, hey, are you there yet? Did you qualify? And when I'd run a marathon, they'd all be wanting to know. So every time I ran, guess who was there with me? All the people that I had spoken my commitment to. Does that add some motivation? Adds a ton of motivation. The other motive I had for qualifying for Boston was that Sherry said I wasn't allowed to run an ultra marathon. She said that the marathon was too much time already, training. So she said, when you qualify for Boston, then you can do it. And I don't think she thought I would qualify for Boston. So in 2010, after I ran the Boston Marathon that April, I said, well, which by the way, Mark Niles drove up to Boston to see me run that. He's not a runner, it's just brotherly love. And another good friend of mine who didn't run anymore, but rode his bike many miles with me and would meet me at diners, and we'd eat scrapple and talk about, running marathons. But he drove up to Boston, gave up his weekend to cheer me on with my family, and to make sure that Sherry could get around Boston, which was wonderful. So I signed up for the Great Eastern Endurance Run, which is a 100K. And I hadn't done anything longer than a marathon, which is 26.2. Anybody know how long 100K is? It's 62.2 miles. And I love the mountains, and I love hiking trails. So the good news is that most ultramarathons are on hiking trails. So you get to spend all that time in God's creation, which is wonderful unless you're fainting and vomiting. Then it's not so exciting. You can't really appreciate. There was one point that I did appreciate the stars while laying on my back at about mile 50, and thought, I'm fine if I stay here. It's okay if I never go home. So let me tell you a little bit about that experience, and then I want us to get to Scripture. How about that? Let's get to Scripture instead of just talking about me. But I went to run this ultra marathon. It was in Virginia in the Blue Ridge Mountains. If you know Lynchburg and Stanton, Charlottesville, there's the stretch of Blue Ridge Mountains between there. That's where the race was, up where the Appalachian Trail goes along the spine of the Blue Ridge. And the design of the course was ingenious. It starts on the Shenandoah Valley side, goes up and over the mountains and down to the Piedmont side, across the Blue Ridge Mountains. Then it goes back up and down to the Shenandoah side. Then it goes back up again. This is the way they designed the course, because we don't have the Rocky Mountains here. So they're just like, well, if we want to make it challenging, you just keep going up and down it. And so my family went with me to Virginia. Mark Niles went with me to Virginia, my cheerleader, and a surprise guest who showed up later. So when you train for an ultramarathon, normally in a marathon, and Brian knows this, and I don't know if anybody else has run a marathon. Andrew ever run a marathon? Dominic, you ran a marathon? You train a long run once a week, you know, that's supposed to be the one to build your endurance, maybe 20 miles. A lot of people top out there, some do more. For an ultramarathon, you have to do 2 long runs in the weekend. And so you run a long one on Saturday, you run a long one on Sunday before church, right? You got to get up early. So that's what I had to do that year. So I would get to where I ran 60 miles in a weekend, because the race was 62, and you can't do that all at once, or you won't be able to train the rest of the week, right? So you just do 2 days in a row. In August and July, when you're doing that kind of thing, and it's humid like it was, it's miserable. I hated every minute of that kind of training. I didn't enjoy any of it. But you know what kept me going? I told people I was going to run and finish the... Was it just pride? Maybe, I don't know. But it was certainly helpful that the people around me, especially the runners, knew what my goal was. So I'm going to fast forward so that we can get to Scripture, but the first 30 miles, I don't even remember them. They were super easy. Because mentally, it was like you adjust your mind to think that, well, it's not that much. You're thinking about the 60, right? You're worried about like mile 40 through 60, so you don't think about the miles before that. And here's what makes it really easy. If you've ever been in a race of any kind that's large, like the Broad Street Run or maybe a large 5K or something, there's throngs of people around you at the beginning. Now when you're on a single track trail in the woods, 50 people is a throng, because you're like, you know, all right behind each other, and everybody's like hooting and hollering and having a good time. When we started the race, we had headlamps on because it started before the sun rose, and I ended at 12:30 in the morning the next day. And we were running in the dark, but it was so exciting because everybody had trained for months, maybe years, to get up to this point. And so this was a day of celebration. And the people around me, they were athletes. I wasn't, but I was with them, and I was like, this is awesome. So excited. The fellowship was great, conversation even. But then as the miles wore on, I saw my family at close to mile 30, and that was exciting. They're like, how you feeling? I'm feeling great. I have a picture of us all smiling, and I'm feeling great. This is going to be, I'm going to blow the lid off my time goal. And then it was maybe 12 miles before I would see them again. And by the time I got to them that time, I cried when I saw them, because I didn't want to keep going. I felt so bad. And I had to change out my stuff on my feet to keep me from getting blisters, and I was already getting those, and I felt weak. I felt sick to my stomach. They didn't see me cry. They don't remember it, but I was crying when I was approaching them. And then I was like, okay, I got to do this thing. And so they had a cooler with some food, and I had something to eat, and then I went on. But every mile, that was the last time I would see them that day, because it got late, they had to drive back to Richmond. And every mile after that, the last 22 miles, was misery. It was awful. I wasn't going to see anyone again. Mark showed up again. But I didn't know if I was going to see anyone again. And I didn't want to go anymore. I just didn't care anymore. I was too tired, too beat up. I didn't care to go on. It didn't seem to matter anymore that I'd trained for months, that I'd actually trained for years, if you count that foundation of miles that I built up running marathons. It just didn't matter. It didn't matter that it was a goal that I had built my life around. I literally had built my life around it in terms of never sleeping in and, you know, deciding when I would do my, you know, work, when we would do things. Everything was built around the training schedule. And yet I was going to give it up. I'd never had a DNF. Do you know what a DNF is? Did not finish. So I never had a DNF. Even if I finish really slow, I want to finish, right? I just want to make sure I finish what I start. So in this race, I got to about mile 45, and a gentleman passed me, and I was ready to have a DNF. I didn't care. But when he got up beside me, he had salt tablets, which are a good thing to take to fight off dehydration, right? Give you some electrolytes. And so he says to me, probably seeing that I looked like death warmed over, he says to me, do you want some of my salt tablets? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. I wasn't fine. I wasn't fine at all. I was nowhere close to fine. I wanted to quit. I felt terrible. I'm fine. You sure? I said, yeah, I'm fine. So I kept going. The next 5 miles after that were just a combination of vomiting and the world spinning and me laying on the trail, looking up at the stars, watching bats swooping down, just enjoying not running. And I walked it was all up a mountain at this point, and I walked for much of it. I laid down. I finally got to an aid station, and you have a checkpoint where they weigh you and they make sure you haven't lost too much fluid or you haven't gained too much fluid. That's a problem too. And they checked on me. All my vitals were good. I'm like, how can they all be good? I don't feel like they're good. I want a reason to quit. Just tell me I can't run, because if your numbers don't add up, they pull you off the course. And before I started the race, I was afraid that would happen to me. But when I got to this point, I just wanted them to pull me off the course. But they put a garbage bag on me because I was shivering, because I was cold. It wasn't cold out, it was a warm day in September, but I was shivering because I was cold and dehydrated, and they're like, have some of this soup, and they were trying to get me to eat things. I ate some things, and then I gave them back to the person who so kindly gave them to me. I felt so bad, but he looked at me and he said, you're going to finish this race. He didn't complain. My vomit was on his shoes. He was just telling me I could finish, and I'm like, you don't know how I feel. I had sat down in a chair and I couldn't get up out of it. I'm like, I can't get out of the chair. He's like, I'll help you out of it. And he helped me out of the chair. And I had run 50 some miles, and I was like, that's an accomplishment. I've never done that before in one time. So I'm good. I can stop. Like, it's nothing to be ashamed of. And I was totally at peace with quitting. And then there was a Jeep behind us, and the guy had a CB radio, and he says, is that Paul Fisher? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, somebody wants to talk to you. So then the CB is handed to me, and this voice on the other side says, well? And I said, well? And he said, when are you going to get here? I said, where? And I recognized there was a student I'd coached in cross country. His name was Colin Gordon. I don't know if any of you know Colin or not, but he went to Eastern University and he still lives locally. But he was up there at the top. I'd coached him from being a pudgy fat kid to competing at states, and so he became a good runner, a really good runner. And I had told him plenty of times, to push it, to keep going, and so forth. And here he was saying to me, when are you going to get here? He was 4 miles away from me and was going to run the last 4 with me. So I had to get the 4 miles up to the top of the mountain to see him. I said, I'm not going to make it, Colin. And he said, no, I'll see you in 4 miles. And I said, no, I'm not, I quit. He's like, no, you're going to come and see me. I'm 4 miles from you. And so, gave the CB back, and the guy walked me back up to the course, to the trail, and he said, all right, now go ahead. And he pushed me up the trail in the dark, and I'm like, I'm going to die out here. Like, I've been passing out on the way up the mountain, and you're at the aid station. You're supposed to protect me from doing something stupid. He's like, you need to go. And so I walked for probably 100 yards or so, and then I kind of, then I started to lift my feet a little bit, and before long I was running. And by the time I got to those 4 miles, I was like, I'm finishing. And the adrenaline was kicking in, and I saw Colin, and he ran the last 4 miles with me. He tripped and hurt himself, but I didn't trip and fall. I should have. I crossed the finish line at 12:30 in the morning. It was like 19 and a half hours. And I was dead last. I was the last person to finish. I think there were 36 that started the race and 24 that finished or something like that. So I like to tell myself I wasn't last, because all the people who didn't finish, they were last. But you had to finish it in 20 hours or they'd pull you from the course. So I was concerned I was going to make it. I made it. And I sat down alone. All the people who were there to cheer on the finishers were gone. And I sat in this pavilion and ate Stouffer's lasagna, like the best lasagna I've ever had. Those terrible lasagna. And so I learned some things from that experience that I want to share with you about being a Christian. Life is an ultramarathon. Sometimes people say life's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Well, if you've run an ultramarathon, you'll realize actually it's more like that. And as I was speaking, several of you were giving me this knowing look that said, I know the spiritual application of that, right? Many of you knew it. I don't even have to say what's here, but don't lose focus. This has been a verse that has been so dear to my heart. Hebrews 12 says, let's fix our eyes on Jesus. Since then, we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so you will not grow weary and lose heart. Two things to focus on for this is fixing our eyes on Jesus. The joy set before him was far greater than the joy set before me in a stupid race. There's absolutely no godly reason why you should go out and run an ultramarathon. And there's really no reason to praise a brother who does. He just has a condition. And he took something a little too far, right? It was good, but you took it a little too far. I'm serious. There's really nothing good about it. But the Lord is so gracious that he redeems our stupidity and then teaches us through it. That's what he did. He taught me some things. When I run a long race, I always have something that keeps me going, right? There's something I'm thinking of. It's my family at the next spot. It's, taking that next goo, it's like a little energy gel, and the little boost I'm going to feel when I do that. Maybe it's, qualifying, visioning myself crossing the line, beating my time from last year, whatever. There's something that keeps me going so that I don't slow down, so that I don't give up. And so in my spiritual life, it's always that Christ has gone before me. And so when we don't fix our eyes on Jesus, though, everything becomes unclear. We're going through suffering. We're going through pain. We think God maybe isn't good. Maybe he doesn't actually love us. And then I fix my eyes on Jesus. And I go, of course he loves me. I can see that in the cross, but I can't make sense of this suffering right now. But I can't stop because I've got my eyes fixed on Jesus. And you have to make the right people a part of your plans, your training, and your racing, right? As a Christian, making the right people a part of your plans. We make all kinds of plans apart from the Lord and apart from brothers and sisters who can give us good counsel. Plans on how to defeat sin in our life, plans on what we're going to do for a career or a job, plans on what we're going to do for education, and we don't have deep fellowship with those who will ask the Lord together with us and who can share from their experience as believers. What sustained me in so much of my running was sitting with runners across the table, spending time beside them, running and learning from their experiences. There was also the guy who clearly was better than me as he was passing me on the course, offering me what I really needed, right? But I chose to kind of be a lone ranger and not really, take any relationship with those people who obviously had more experience and knew better than me. It's time to get yoked together with believers, right? We always focus on who to not be yoked to when we read this passage. It says, do not be yoked together with unbelievers, for what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? If you're yoked together, you're going in the same direction. You can't help it. You're fastened to one another, right? And we've got to be a band of brothers and sisters who are fastened to one another. And if Jason goes in the wrong direction, he's pulling me with him so that I can go, Jason, where are you taking us? That's the right direction. And he can do the same for me. Two of us together, that's probably going to happen. If he's out by himself or I'm out by myself, it's not happening. And you and I both have plenty of family and friends who will counsel us to go in the wrong direction. And if we have too much affinity for them and not enough for brothers and sisters in the faith, we will go with them. Their rationale will become ours. We will be yoked together with those that we care most deeply about and we spend the most time with. In this passage, God says, one of these beautiful passages from the Old Testament. I will live with them. I will walk among them. They will be my people. I'll be a father to you. You will be my sons and daughters. We often talk about a church family. Our bulletin for a long time said a loving church family. We have it on our van. We also have a mission statement that we've kind of put onto the bulletin that's on our website that I'm going to remind us of, that talks about equipping and encouraging and growing. And we are a family, but what kind of family sits like this, doesn't like talk to each other across the table ever, and actually functions like a family? Like, families don't do that. And if someone doesn't show up to the dinner table, we don't think about it for 6 months. Like, oh, where's so-and-so been? Oh, yeah. Like, imagine if you did that at your family table. Have you seen Arden in the last 2 months? No. Have you, honey? No. I wonder if the mayor knows where she is. I wonder if the elders know where they've been. Like, no, you deal with it right there in that part of your family with those who are close to you. The end of that passage says that the reason that we're doing all this is to perfect holiness. Perfect holiness. For me, that's far worse than qualifying for Boston. It's a lot tougher than finishing an ultramarathon. Perfecting holiness out of reverence for Christ, who we've got our eyes fixed on this journey, and we're supposed to perfect holiness. I can't do that alone. I need to look at Lloyd Peters and say, Lloyd, tell me about how you've perfected holiness in this part of your life, because you have something like 50 years on me. I think I could probably learn something from you. That's what we need to be doing, right? Involving the right people in our training, and so when we talk about life groups, we have a conversation about, do we do it by demographics? No, the young people need the older people. And sometimes the older people need to be reminded of what it's like to be young, so that their heart will kind of soar again as they look at the faith of young people and what they're doing. Seek those with experience. I'd never talked to anyone who had ever run an ultramarathon before. I never ran with anyone who'd ever done one. And it puffed up my ego big time, because I'm a guy. And so it felt good. In fact, my ego was so big that if I met somebody who had run one, I'd be like, well, any guy ever recognize that, or a woman? Is there a woman in the audience who knows what that kind of ego is like? Instead of going and consulting people and saying, hey, I don't know anything about this, I wanted to pretend that I did, that I was something I wasn't. We do that when we come to church all the time. We pretend we're something we're not. And we don't say to people, I really stink at this. I don't have a clue. We have to seek those with experience. Like, really, seek them, learn from them. Say, it doesn't matter what they think of me. It just doesn't matter. Because if I worry about that, I'm never going to get to my destination. Never going to finish this race. I've got to say it. We have a cloud of witnesses. When we run this race of faith, there's a cloud of witnesses all around us. They're all around us. In Hebrews chapter 11, it tells us who they are. And there's more than what's included there. Hebrews 11 talks about all the heroes of faith who've gone before us. And they're a cloud of witnesses, almost like you're at this event, this race, and all of those witnesses, the Hall of Fame, are gathered all around you. You're heroes in the faith, and they're cheering you on in this race. And they're available to you to say, Moses, how do you handle griping and complaining people? Well, I didn't handle it so well. Let me tell you what not to do. These are the witnesses who know that God's wisdom is supreme, and it will get you to the finish line. He knows how to get you there. Consult with those people, and you have that cloud of witnesses in this room. You do. And obviously, the one we consider the most and consult the most as an expert is Jesus, who was tempted in every way as we are, yet was without sin. And he is sympathetic. He understands exactly what we've been through. The scripture that Harry read to us says, let us, let us, let us. There's nothing in here that talks about me or I or you. It's us, spurring one another on. And when you look at the Greek word for that, it is like spurs. It's not about the physical spurs, but it means like agitating kind of like irritating someone to movement. Do brothers and sisters irritate in the church? We sure do. But there better be a lot of irritating in the right direction. It's irritating when someone says, are you going to the ladies' retreat? Are you going to the men's retreat? I'm really busy, and I am. And I created that mess. Right? If you're ever mad at brothers and sisters for asking if you're doing something that would be good for you, that's kind of a sign. I know exactly what you're feeling. How can I preach about it if I haven't felt it? I know exactly what you're feeling. Or someone says, are you participating in this? Are you doing life groups? And you're like, I feel irritated by that because I'm already doing, let's agitate one another a little bit. The only reason I pray on Wednesdays afterwards is because he agitated me. You know? Warren's like, you're going to come pray. Okay, I guess I'm praying. That's what we're called to do. Thank you for fulfilling that in that respect. And I'm going to have to spur you on to some things, right? Invest in relationships with your comrades and shepherds. You'll need them. You will need them. As soon as I find myself alone in a race, if it's a really tough one, I find out how much I need relationship. What was it that helped me finish that ultramarathon? What is the only reason I finished? Relationship with Colin. I spent a lot of time with someone who had the same goals that I did, who had the same passions that I did, who knew as a young man what it took to finish something that physically difficult. And a lot of what he knew was stuff I had taught him. But I couldn't tell myself those things in my condition. And sometimes spiritually we're in that position where we need other people because we can't tell ourselves anything that we used to know. Have you ever been there where you knew things, you had convictions, and you no longer can see them or hear them? You can't convince yourself of anything good. You will need each other. If you do like I did in that race and you just keep going thinking, my training is sufficient, I've done this, I've never had a DNF, you won't make it. And if you look at your sin, your rap sheet, and you go, well, I've never fallen into this, I've never fallen into that, I've never had trouble believing, you will. You'll be vomiting and passed out and weak and need someone to help you walk. Don't isolate yourself from the people you will need. It's why life groups matter. It's why the retreats matter, which our congregation is hosting. And you can sign up online for them, or you can go out in the lobby and on the bulletin board, right, there's maybe some paper registration too. Next Saturday, the ladies are praying, 8:30 to 10:30 for those retreats. Specifically, I think the ladies' retreat, that you might pray for the men too. They'll think about it. So you could also sign up just so that we kind of know who's going to be coming out in the lobby. And this afternoon, there's worship out at camp with several area-wide churches, and you can bring a dish to share. We're going to eat at 4, or maybe a little after we visit. 4 is early on a Sunday to eat. It's fine, more food. But then after that, there'll be some worship, and that'll wrap up sometime between 7 and 8. Invest in those people. We got to stop. I'm sorry, but I went long. Are you used to it yet? Okay. At some point, the elders will talk to me. It won't just be a joke. I can't skip this. In Thessalonians, the Apostle Paul said to the church there, we ought always to thank God for you, brothers, and rightly so, because your faith is growing more and more, and the love every one of you has for each other is increasing. Therefore, because of your love, right, that you have for each other, and your growing faith, therefore, among God's churches, we boast about your perseverance and faith in all the persecutions and trials you are enduring. It's because of their growing love and faith that he's thankful to God. And it's that growing love, that dedication to one another, that makes them a church that he can brag about because of perseverance. If we do not love each other that way and don't invest in each other's lives, the perseverance part will not follow. It's why there's a church. Next week we talk about the church as a body. It's essential that we take it seriously. We've bought the lie for too long that we can handle this, me and God, or me and my Christian spouse and God. We can't do that. And if we don't need each other now, or we think we don't, the day is coming, and that investment is important. It's by this quality that all men will know that you are my disciples, Jesus says. If you love one another, and love must do more than just show up at church and check it off my list. It just has to. It's not really love. If I just showed up at home every night, came home every day, my wife wouldn't say, he really loves me. Sometimes that's about what I do as a husband. But that's when she has to ask, do you love me? Because I'm just showing up at the minimum required amount. And it's not to guilt trip, it's to say, do you want to finish the race? Do you want to finish the race? These points are redundant and we're out of time. If you do all those things, you're obviously investing in the success of others, right? That's the whole point, investing in the success of others. If today I'm doing well, maybe the others aren't, and if they don't see me or I'm not engaged, they won't be doing as well. It's important that I think about the church as how it is I help other people finish. How can I be a witness that will help them with my testimony? Those are the 6 things that I learned from not just running, but from doing life together as a church. You probably have something in your life where God has taught you similar lessons. This was just the one that I could relate to, and hopefully you did too. But some of you haven't even started that race, you know? You haven't even gotten off the couch. There's that Couch to 5K in however many weeks program. We can put a program together for you. God already has one. It starts with acknowledging Jesus as Lord. And then he takes it from there. You confess your sin. You profess your faith in him. You're baptized to be united with him in his death, and then you are united with him in his resurrection. And in class, in Ephesians, we talk about the power of that resurrection today, if you want to find out what that will look like. That's when the race begins. If you haven't begun the race, then you need to begin the race today. And then we'll run it together. 1 Corinthians 9 says, people who do physical training, all my stupid 20 minutes of talking about running that wasted time in the sermon, that stuff doesn't even matter. That doesn't matter. It's frivolous. Anything I get doesn't last from that. But what I get from this race, united with Christ, fixed on him, lasts forever. If you care about finishing that race, and you need something, or you just need to start the race in order to get there, why don't you come and share that, or share with us afterwards while we stand and we sing.